The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to the next in our series, the How CDOs Succeed, our series on how they succeed. Yes, that's the key. Anyway, we were trying to get this up to twice a monthly session at the rhythm on this after the conference the end of this month, and we'll be hopefully rolling out a bunch more of these things. But anyway, with us today, we have Robert Abate, who, full disclosure, has been a friend, colleague, co-author, and partner in crime, I guess, Robert, if we don't say too much, going forward on all sorts of adventures. And of course, Robert Lutton, who's always on these calls here as well. And our topic today is one focused on new data leaders as they're coming on board. The question is, as a new data leader, whether you get the position because you were the person who complained the most, or whether you become the person who really tried to get that data leadership position and are able to succeed. And Robert's done both of these, which is one of the reasons he's perfectly qualified to start talking to us on this topic. You still need to know what to do when you hit. And I think part of this, and again, Robert will dive into this, is that most people don't know what a CDO or a data person does. So the question is, how can we quickly, in a very short amount of time, learn what are the things to do? And that's what Robert's going to talk about today, and then we'll sort of move it into a panel and discussion. Most importantly are the questions coming from you guys. So hopefully you figured out the WebEx interface now and know how to ask questions and all that sort of good stuff. Let's see, Robert, I've introduced you. You've got your slides up. I think we're all ready to go. Oh, no, I haven't told much about you. So I said you've been a friend and colleague for many years and all that sort of thing. We met back when you were working at one of the fashion, Ralph Lauren, wasn't it? Yeah, gosh, that was a long time ago. I've kept track of each other's careers going and actually appearing in the same places, whether it's a conference or an engagement. But anyway, Robert's got many, many years of experience in this field, has been CDO for a number of organizations, and has been more than willing to help contribute his knowledge into our society, which is what we're really concerned with. So again, Robert, thank you for being here today, and we'll look forward to the collaboration of best practices as you kick off the topic here.
Sounds great. Well, thank you, Peter, and glad to be a part of the ISCDO webinar series. These are really informative. I've been watching a number of them, learning a tremendous amount. You never stop learning. So primarily, we're going to talk today about the first 90 days as a CDO. It's your starting or your startup. And we actually have created a best practices document. We'll talk about that, something we're going to share with you. And we'll leave plenty of time for questions and answers, but you have not only myself, who I was the Director of Data Architecture at Walmart, and then the Global Director of Enterprise Data Management and Analytics at Kimberly-Clark, which is effectively the CDO, since that was prior to the title really becoming popular. You've got Dr. Peter Aiken, you've got Robert Lutton. So we'll be able to answer a number of questions as we go through and talk about these first 90 days. So let me take you first, starting with what a best practices discussion is. We created a document called a 30, 60, 90-day action plan for the Office of the Chief Data Officer. It's a template. It's in Microsoft Word, but we can convert it to any format you'd like. And it's primarily a set of learnings from myself, from Todd Harbour. Todd Harbour was the ex-CDO of the state of New York, as well as a member of the board of the ISCDO. Todd has a tremendous experience in taking CDO roles. So I leaned heavily on Todd in the building of this document back at Kimberly-Clark. We built this document. I used some of his material that he had built for the state of New York. Prior to that, he was in the federal government in the CDO role. Michael Cervantes also has given some input, but a best practice or technique is just something that works. It really is the easiest thing to say, and it kind of becomes a standard. Now, best practices are great, except that one of the challenges we have as a CDO is a description of something that is always different. In fact, I found in the roles of CDOs that I've worked with, both as a consultant and as a friend, each have very different responsibilities, very different organizational structures, and that creates hence the challenge to doing this. But what this document, this Word document that we're going to share with everyone after this call, is meant to do is give you the considerations and the capability to go out and start with at least some of the considerations you need. And that part of that is going to be shared as of now. If you are a member of the ISCDO, you can go up to the ISCDO website. You can go under the member area right here, and under member area sharing, under files, you will actually see the ISCDO file called CDO Your First 90 Days, 90, I believe it's 30, 60, 90-day plan. So let's talk about that. This document is open, obviously, to all members. We're going to open it up to everyone who joins this call today as well. Starting from the beginning, your first 90 days are critical in an organization. I think we all agree to that. It's essential to establish relationships, to ascertain the current state of where you're walking into, a need to identify what's missing very quickly, because you're going to be the one responsible for regulatory compliance. And not to mention, to be able to find some low-hanging fruit and propose some future state you could develop. Now, as part of this template, we take on things like alignment and how do we address strategic business problems, the scope of the data, what is the breadth we're dealing with, the ability to get fund initiatives, priority, and empowerment. So these are the primary considerations that we take in, and we'll go into that now in a little more detail. So some of the starting considerations. Rather than bring you through a very large document, I think it's about 20 some odd pages now. I think the best thing to do is kind of give you the table of contents and allow for that narrative to begin, which is, what do you do in the first 30, 60, and 90 days? And then as part of it, what are those deliverables? So this was based on actually the work of both Todd Harbour and myself, building some of the key things you would need: management activities, corporate activities. We describe what those are inside of the document. And some of the deliverables you have to start working on. Your data vision, your value proposition for your office. That's critical to get it out to everyone. You've been brought aboard for a reason. You've got a vision, and the value proposition you bring is to the organization. Another deliverable you begin working on in your first 30 days is the current state of data management practices. And we try to use some of the available today standards we'll talk about, like DAMA has the DMBOK, and you can look at the wheel. There's also a number of other techniques to find out current state. You're going to want to be developing very quickly a data ethics, privacy, and data protection plan, as well as a strategy presentation that you're going to give at the end of your 90 days to the board, to the C-level executives. But you're going to want to have that as soon as you can to go out and start meeting with other leaders within the organization. So your first 30 days in the CDO role is just like walking into a swamp. you sink very quickly into needing to get to know and meet all of the individuals simultaneously with having to build these documents. At 60 days, you're starting to build management activities and corporate activities, and I will actually open the document to show it to you if anyone would like. And the deliverables, again, we're working on these current state management, the ethics, but now we've started a data governance working group, a task force, if you will. If there's not data governance in place, minimally master data management in place, this would be by day 60, somewhere you'd want to have that task force created and people aligned with that strategy. And now you're out taking that data strategy presentation and document, which kind of describes the organization, and you're out meeting with the different individuals within the organization. You want to meet every single peer within the organization who has challenges, and ask them, what keeps you up at night when it comes to data? What would really aid your job? And start collecting those answers to questions, and you can prioritize those. I always like to, and this is kind of a sidebar, but I always like to build an Excel spreadsheet as I'm collecting questions. And I put 2 columns in that spreadsheet. One of them is value of the organization, 0, which would be very low value, 5, which would be extremely high value. And the second column I would put is level of effort or cost, but they're both synonymous effectively. So, and in terms of level of effort, a 0, excuse me, would be a very low effort, could be done overnight, and a 5 would be it would take moving mountains and incredible investment. So here we are, and that, given those 2 columns being added to the spreadsheet, you're then able to create a crosshairs document, where the upper right corner of that document says, these are things that are high value but high cost. The bottom right corner would be high value, low cost. And as you can see, that'd be an area you'd want to focus on. And to your left, you would have low value, high cost on the top, and low value, low cost on the bottom. So I'm just throwing that out to you as a little teaser that it's helpful to, as you're collecting these questions and meeting with individuals, kind of in your mind, guesstimate. This is very high value to the organization and very low cost, and those are the ones you're going to want to flag very quickly and make them the low-hanging fruit that you go after. And then 90-day plan. You're finishing your data management practices analysis. You've finalized an ethics and privacy and data protection plan. You've got the governance group hopefully in place, and your strategy presentation in place. And then we've added a number of appendices, and these are all coming from the experience. I just got a note here that Todd Harbour and Mike Cervantes have joined the call. These are the 2 industry thought leaders that we've been waiting for. I want to introduce Todd Harbour, the ex-CDO of the state of New York, who had provided a tremendous amount of information to me in building these best practice documents. Todd is a member of the board of the ISCDO, but was just extremely helpful in providing the documents that helped me build the best practices document. And he has more 3- and 4-letter digits after his name than anyone can mention. Let's see, MSc, MSCM, PGMP, PMP, CDMP, and DGSB. We could add in QRST and a couple others, but he's doing great. So welcome, Todd. I'm glad you're here. Please feel free to jump in at any time. I also want to introduce Michael Cervantes. Michael is the acting global director of the International Society of Chief Data Officers. Both are extremely experienced in this field, and were the primary drivers behind the development of this best practices discussion. So welcome both. I'm going to go back for a second. We just introduced some of the ideas behind the table of contents. I'm going to just pop onto the next frame here because I'm almost actually done with this PowerPoint, which was meant to be a discussional document. There really are many, industry standards and regulations to go out and consider: Gartner ICF, DAMA DM BOK, FAIR, the findable, accessible, and interoperable, reusable, as well as some of the other sources. But what really intrigued me was I went out and I found this article that Gartner produced, the Gartner Research produced, calling the CDO enters V4.0. Now, for most of us, the role of the CDO is a constantly shifting, almost a quicksand of projects and issues that are given to you as you join an organization. And when you come in, you'll understand whether master data is in place, reference data is in place, and alike. But I was kind of surprised to see that this was back in August of 2019 that they had CDO 4.0. That 1 was data management, 2 embraced analytics, 3 was digital transformation, and the fourth was on products and profit. I wouldn't be surprised if they come out with 5.0 and give it some monetization. So that was really the presentation. So, but I'd like to now, introduce Todd and Mike. Let them give you their feelings and their challenges and what they faced in their first 90 days in CDOs. And I'm going to just go past this for a second. I think, I'm going to start with Todd, because Todd, being the ex-CDO of the state of New York and had shared with me a number of table of contents and documents, had given me a lot of this guidance. So Todd, this was a table of contents you shared with me to your building of the New York State CDO. Maybe you might want to expand on your background and practices.
Well, thanks, Robert, and I apologize to everybody for coming to the session a little bit late. Like many people, I was having some video problems, so I think I've gotten them worked out, and I'm ready to help and share all the information that I can. A little bit about my background. I'm a retired federal employee, and I also was the New York State Chief Data Officer for about 18 months. I have very interesting thoughts on comparing my federal service against my state service. One of the mistakes I made, and it's one of those mistakes that you might classify as a life lesson. Life lesson is a euphemism for generally making a really bad mistake. And what I mean by that is I didn't prepare myself for the difference between federal service and state service. I wrongly assumed that government was alike, no matter what level of government it was. So when I left federal service and retired in 2016 and went up to New York, I had a lot of baggage that I took with me. I made a lot of assumptions about what working at a state level and being a CDO for a state was going to be like. I did, however, I think I had a pretty good idea what I needed to do. And this is some of the material that I thought long and hard about. I knew that New York was a greenfield opportunity, and that was part of one of the things that attracted me to state service. And I knew that my boss at the time was really looking for someone to focus exclusively on data. And she was a very, very smart woman, I think, in retrospect. She was one of these people that knew what she didn't know, and she was constantly looking for people to help her fill those voids. And I think that was why she and I got along so well. What I knew about New York when I got up there was, like I said, it was a greenfield opportunity. And what I knew before I got up there was I needed to have a very, very clearly defined role. And for me, knowing what the boundaries of my swim lane were and really what decisions I owned were critically important. So one of the first things I did, I put a 100-day plan together versus a 90-day plan like Robert was describing. And in it, I basically took the time and described everything that I thought a CDO needed to do. And I prepared myself for a conversation with my boss because I wanted to get her consent. I wanted to get her approval that these were my decisions. And in retrospect, that was so important. I was talking to some other friends of mine, and I was sharing some of my experiences, and I told my friend, his name's Patrick, I said, Patrick, here's what I did. And he sort of had an interesting response. He said, well, that's no different than any other job. Any job needs to work out what its mission, role, and functions are. And I said, yes, that's exactly right. But if you think about how new a chief data officer is and how the relationships between data and technology and these other key activities are, there are not clearly defined definitions of these things. So what I shared with Robert was, this is the outline of my 100-day plan. This was my job description, essentially. In the document behind it said that I was responsible for owning the decisions behind each one of these areas, how I would support a technology leader, how I would support the CIO, how I would support a CISO. And that was really difficult. And I ended up getting concurrence from my boss at the time that I owned these decisions. I was responsible for these things. I was accountable for all of these activities. The interesting part of the story where it became a life lesson was not long after I got to New York, my boss got fired. So for those of you who have been through that kind of a turmoil, you realize like everything that you had relied on simply went away, and I had to start all over again from scratch. And this is an incredibly time-consuming and painful process. At least I found it was. So I would encourage everybody, if you are going into the role or into the profession of being a chief data officer, give a lot of time to what you think a chief data officer should do. There's still a great deal of disagreement, and Peter Aiken will tell you that that there's still disagreement. Some are more technology focused, some are more policy focused. But take the time to outline and get concurrence what your authorities are. That was really important for me.
You know, I'm going to add to this. You had also shared with me some of the things you created, like a data inventory program, these policies, data policies. Maybe you want to expand on?
Yeah, so I'm doing the same exact thing at my company right now. We needed to have some stakes in the ground in terms of what we thought our organization needed to do. This is just an example of one of the documents that we produced up in New York. I'm doing the same exact thing at my company here. I've gone through, prioritized all of the data functions that we want our company to do. In the case of New York, it was a similar activity, but we needed to have a statement that said, these things are important to the state of New York, or these things are important to my organization. Insert the name of your organization here. We needed to have a data inventory program. When I was a federal officer, we had the same problem that we had in New York that we have here in my company today. We absolutely need to know what data assets we have, where are they, and what are people doing with them. There are lots of different rules regarding data and how it's to be disseminated, or what kinds of analytics we can do against that data. And saying very clearly in no uncertain terms that here's a data asset, we know what system it's in, we know the kinds of people that are operating and interrogating it, is critically important. So I set a rule. It's a bit arbitrary, I admit it. I said, I don't want to have a 50-page document that nobody is ever going to read and become shelfware, but I want things that people will use as a reference. So we created a very simple model that said all policies describe what we want to do, and no policy could be any longer than 7 pages. Beyond that, or in greater detail, when you get to the how, these are your processes and procedures. We wanted to have equally small documents, but have many of them. So you would have N number of processes that would be related to a given program. So for example, the process that would describe how we would catalog our data might be one of them. And then eventually standards. What standards are we going to use to catalog our data? So these things become chained documents, and they can evolve independent from one another without having to go through massive rewrites. I saw other policies while I was in New York that were enormous, and it would literally take a year to pass these documents around and get concurrence before they could ever get published again. And I said, that's another lesson I'm going to learn, and at my company, we're doing exactly what I wanted to do in New York. No document will be longer than 7 pages. Now, having said that, is there going to be an exception? Absolutely. But if you lay out the requirements, say, look, fit it into 7 pages, generally speaking, people will get down to the essence of things pretty darn quickly. The other thing that I want to mention about these policies is we need to describe what an organization should do relative to data. Generally, people, in my experience, don't object. Should we know what data assets we have? People go, yeah, we should. Should we have a quality over our data? Yeah, they should. So you have a different kind of person that gets involved at the policy level. When you get down to processes, you have a different kind of actor involved. And now you're talking about, well, who's going to be responsible for what? So the people involved typically change when you get into processes, in my experience. And then when you get down to standards, you're generally in a technical domain, and you'll have a different kind of person participating and having opinions about what standards they should use in order to record and catalog our data. But generally, you'll have executive officers at a policy level. So that was another lesson learned. Back to you, Robert.
So shall I jump in then?
Oh, there you go, Mike.
There we go. So rather like you, Todd, I'm going to sort of look at a couple of the places that I've worked that I can draw some examples from, because I think what the general piece that I've got out of listening to Robert and yourself is that each place is different, and at the moment there is no sort of general description as to what a chief data officer is, because people don't know, and it's one of the things that the society is looking into is can we produce a general definition, because there must be a general definition of what a chief information officer is, what a chief marketing officer is, although there is, you know, that that sort of centralized, generalized definition doesn't necessarily apply in each and every company. So we accept that. And I'm going to draw upon three different organizations, and just to be alliterative, I'm going to say that one is tank, one is rank, and one is a bank. So the tank relates to my time in the military. Rank is an organization that I worked for, and a bank. Well, it happens to be a bank, and it was a bank in Spain that I was working in. All three were different, and all three, the whole sort of process of getting decisions made about whether or not we needed to have the chief data officer in the first place, and what the chief data officer then did, were different, and it centered around the culture. It centered around where the business, what in the case of the two businesses, where they were in their business cycles, and you know what the demands were being placed upon those businesses. So in the bank's case, they were under the cosh from the regulator, and so there was a real drive then to sort out its data. Unfortunately, I think in their case, the chief data officer may well be sort of characterized as the chief dictator officer. And there was the CDO who I was in advising was not one to listen, and he was one to fight the people that he was working with. And it didn't matter that he had the ear of the CEO. I think in this instance, his whole approach was one that, you know, it was his way or the highway, and people needed to get out of his way, because he was going to change the bank, and people and how the bank was run, and how people did their businesses, and they just needed to do it because he said so. And that never works, because you're dealing with people, and the people that were there just reacted badly against it. And to say it went to hell in a handcart quite quickly is something of an understatement. Rescued only by the intervention, dare I say it, of COVID, which changed how people related to each other, and how they related to the sort of centralized diktats from the business. In rank, it was very interesting. They were doing well. They had a pressure from their primary shareholder and what they were going to, on the need to increase profitability, but they were primarily focused on how they could prepare themselves for the general data protection regulations and what that meant to them. And then there was the realization that the CEO came to in a series of discussions that I had, is that he needed this data leadership. He needed to have somebody in a position where they could make the decisions that Todd was talking about, and where those decisions could stick, but who worked with the organization to get it done. You know, as a for instance, you know, when we arrived and began working through the data assets that the company owned, they declared 5 to us. There were only 5 systems that held data, and that was great. By the time we got about 7 months into the project, by the time we'd got the CEO, who was open to the ideas, open to the idea of sort of using data to achieve his business aims, we discovered that there were 210 different assets, and it was going up every day. And so there was a huge sort of backlog of work that meant that we created a starting point for a chief data officer to come in. We took in the chief data officer and let them get on, having done all the preparation work, so that they could come in. Their 60-day and 90-day programs were about how they could utilize what was available, rather than how they could looking for what their aims needed to be, and following a program. And I can only suggest that the program, sort of 90-day, 30-day, 60-day, 90-day program that Robert put up at the beginning was something that, if you're in that position, you need to look at and sort of build upon. In the army, it was very interesting, and it comes back to how you get the leadership to buy in. What we had was an army board member who got the idea that we were giving it, that we were spinning to him, that there needed to be this change. And this is where we began working with the US military and MIT in developing some of our ideas about how we would create this CDO. And we were going great guns. We'd achieved the creation of the office. We'd achieved the recruitment of the manning required. We'd got the finances squared away, and then he was moved on, promoted, which was great. However, back to square one, to somebody who hadn't been dealing with data, who hadn't seen the relevance of it, and who was a huge skeptic, which sort of ground everything to a halt. And we had to then sort of develop our whole sort of communications program again, looking at a completely different approach to that individual, while at the same time still working where we had the success in the organization, to sort of maintain the level of progress that we were going, in the hope that eventually, as happened, the new man could be brought round to it. So what do I think? In the first 30 days, there is a tendency to rush at it, and there's a tendency to look at all these great Gartner's CDO version 4 and say, well, I'm not at version 4. Look, that's what version 4 says I should be at, and I'm not there, so I must be failing. But you're not. Each of the levels, I think, from my experience, is better described. The versions is better described as a level. So you're a CDO level 1, a level 2, a level 3, and to Robert's point, there's going to be a version 5, but it should really be level 5, and that's just about how settled you are in the role, how settled your policies are, how effective they are across the whole of the organization, whether or not you're getting into dealing with the analytics or other parts of how the organization utilizes and gains value from its data, and that should always be progressive. I think one of the great things that I came across, having been in the military, was that they expected me to come up with something within 30 days, something that could have real value, something that was a deliverable, the low-hanging fruit, as they called it. Absolute danger, because as you get to the low-hanging fruit, and they'll say the in-year low-hanging fruit, you've got to achieve all of these, you get distracted from what are the real aims of what you're trying to do across the business, and what are the changes that you'll make to how the data is used that will deliver a real value. At Rank, they got this, and they got it because I was able to look at them and say, you've just spent 18 million pounds on a project to create a certain capability, and you're creating some lookup tables or some matching tables for the various ways which an entity is described, which is great, but you have no plan to use it. There is no plan to turn that into master data. So that was one of the, and therefore you'd spend a whole bucket load of money, and there were a whole bunch of people working on the data quality, and they weren't. What they were doing was looking for instances that looked the same, grouping them together and saying, I've achieved. And you could deliver that, and the business bought that as an achievement, and it delivered nothing. It didn't change how the systems worked. It didn't make them easier to work. It didn't actually deliver any value. It just employed a few people to do some work. Now, had they gone through the whole quality piece, turning it into master data, using that master data against their systems, they could have begun to deliver a value from that. But that was, not the way they were heading. It's the way they headed eventually, because that's the way we took them. So, and that took more than 30 days. Under the sort of 30, 60-day mantra, if I wasn't delivering my low-hanging fruits, and that was one of them, but it doesn't necessarily achieve. So, my suggestion is don't rush at it. Understand who your boss is, as Todd and Robert have both said. Understand what your level of authority is, and probably ask for more. Understand how the business works and how its people relate to each other. And
so, Michael, great summary. Let me just cut you off there, because I know we've got a bunch of questions that everybody wants to get at these guys. Well, we've got some time on here, but thank you, Michael. Thank you, Todd, and thank you, Robert, for some great presentation ideas around this. And like I said, we do have some questions, so let me just move right to them. What are 3 ways to get people to pay attention and raise awareness in the things that you're bringing up so vital to the success of the organization? Rather than each of you give 3, maybe each of you would give 1 when this worked for you in the past, in the interest of trying to hit some of these cues. Who wants to go first? Oh, in that case, I'll call on somebody. Michael?
Call the one who's never afraid to come forward.
Absolutely.
So, what are the 3 things to do? Is to make people understand. That's a difficult one to say, because it is organization specific. In the business that I worked in, not the army, not the bank, I was able to take the data relating to this expensive project that should have been producing value, put it in front of the CEO, and explain to him in English, not in data speak, what they were doing, what the deliverable was from what they were doing, and what the delta between that and the deliverable that it needed to be to deliver value was. And he got that very quickly,
really concise,
and therefore bought into it. So, it's that sort of how you give somebody a tangible that they can understand to get them to see the value out of the data, rather than say data governance or data quality program is the be all and end all.
Sure. Todd?
Peter, I could jump in next.
Jump in, Robert.
As I noted earlier, one way that I found that worked really well was to go out and ask people what kept them up at night with data. And you would often get some surprising answers. One I remember at Kimberly-Clark was that the business unit that was the flagship business unit was losing market share, and it was becoming very problematic to the point where even the president and CEO was looking at it. And the person, when I asked the question, what's keeping you up at night with data, their reply was, well, I don't know why we're losing market share. I said, well, we can help you with that. We'll do a very quick analysis of data science, and within, let's say, about 6 to 9 weeks, we should be able to give you some idea. And these are the low-hanging fruit I refer to when I say what would be really high value but low investment. What we did was we brought in a vendor and told the vendor, listen, if you'll do this project cheap, meaning almost for free, provide us with the hardware, the software, and the data scientists that we need, I'm sure we can talk to the corporation about buying the equipment. In other words, trying to get a partner to show some value. And as it turned out, we were able to pull in data from the CDC, from infant mortality, from hospitals on birth rates. We took in data from all different kinds of sources, including the census, so that we understood education levels and the like. And what we learned was that we were selling our diapers into markets that were looking for lower cost items, and these were higher cost, and that's why we were losing market share. So the net is to get people to listen is often to understand what their challenge is and try and very quickly show them how data can help. And that that one project we did remunerated amongst the entire organization to the point where every single VP now had left a message on my phone saying, when you have a moment, I'd like to talk with you about a data project we'd like to do.
Fantastic.
So what you asked for.
Oh. Well, again, that kind of success is interesting. Todd, an example quickly, and then we'll go on to another question.
Sure. I think one of the best examples that I can give is change the focus of your organization. And by that, I mean, there's always a contention between technology and the data. Data is your organization. So what I did is when we stood up our company, our CIO works for me, the Chief Data Officer. I realized that this is a bit of a heresy to say in public, but IT works for data. In other words, they work for the business. That's how you'll get a lot of attention, particularly the CIO's attention.
Well, the dramatic is an important aspect of it too. I mean, full disclosure here, Todd and I are co-authors on a number of different, hopefully interesting and useful pubs on this. But there is that importance to make that distinction out there, right?
Oh, absolutely. Peter, you and I have talked about this literally for years, and it wasn't until the last book we actually, decided to put out exemplars of how this could work in organizations. For example, in the state of Virginia, the CIO and the CDO are peers, and they both work for, if I recall, the Secretary of Administration. More often than not, you'll have a CDO subordinate to the CIO. So if you think about it, if you buy the argument that data is the business, you have the business reporting to some technology. That to me, that makes no sense at all.
Focused on it, yeah. Well, let's not dive on that. It is a good point, and buy the books, and you guys can read about them, right? Actually, special show pricing. If you approach Todd or I, we've got discounts we can let you have. But let me get to the questions here. So here's a good one and I'll toss it out to the group. Changes in momentum can happen at any time, as we've all lived through, right? That's my editorializing there. Question is, how important is it to move fast when you have momentum behind you, such as to create new headcounts, versus being methodical in establishing a complete foundation, such as the charter and governance body? Great question. And if anybody wants me to repeat it, I'll do it faster next time.
I would appreciate that, Peter.
Well,
I'm going to try to write this down.
yeah. So everybody's got the change as a constant, so changes can happen at any time. How important is it to move fast when you have momentum behind you, such as create new headcounts, versus being methodical and establishing a complete foundation, such as a charter and a governance body? So move fast and break things, or build carefully, but perhaps not get to the payoff quite as fast. I think that's what the question's implying.
I'll give you my 2 cents, which is probably worth about half that. You do both simultaneously.
Oh my goodness.
Because it requires, since you have momentum, that you use it to hire staff. Simultaneously, you're building these background processes like your management activities of creating, and you'll actually see on the next page some of the deliverables you're actually creating. So you need people in order to create those deliverables: the data management practices analysis and ethics analysis, data governance working group strategy. So at Kimberly Clark, I hired very fast data governance expertise, data quality expertise, and used a set of artificial intelligence tools to very quickly give me a status of an indicator of where I was. And in fact, if you go through this document as we go down, one thing you could do, for example, is something called a domain analysis. And I'm going to expand this a little bit so you can see it. You can actually show very quickly to your organization what is our integrity, what is our transparency, what is our checks and balances, our auditability, stewardship. These are areas, and this was many years ago, but today there's, you could look at many different areas, but the more, so you've got momentum, hire the people and have them start doing things like understanding the current state would be my answer. I'll stop there.
Okay, but a bifurcated approach, and it has worked for you in the past, so that's super. Todd or Michael, any comments on the move fast and break things, or be careful kind of an approach?
You want to go, Michael?
Yeah, Todd, thanks. I think if you're too careful, you don't get anywhere. You lose your momentum. Todd and I both worked in sort of government type organizations, which tend to be sort of annualized in their budgets. So if somebody says my wallet's open and we'll hire somebody, you leap at it, and you sort of work out what you're going to do with them later, almost. But I would say in general, if the wallet's open, you've got some deliverables that you think that you're actually going to achieve. Do that, and don't be afraid of breaking things, because it's the only way you're going to actually deliver real change in any sort of any sort of relevant time frame. Otherwise, you're fighting the inertia that is the culture of the business. So I think, to Robert's answer, yeah, there's gonna have to be behind everything you do, the sort of the thickening out of all your actions, the building of the policies, the making sure that people are turning up to the governance meetings and all of that, and that's got to keep going beyond. But if people are giving you the opportunity to move fast, take it. Don't make yourself look a fool, but take the chance.
Thanks, Michael. Todd?
Yeah, I would agree with both of you, Michael. You're absolutely right. When somebody opens your wallet, you grab that money, especially in large governmental circles. It's kind of like the present versus future value of money. Once it's in your hand, you can start to do some good with it. So I completely agree. I would also suggest that you want to fail early and often, and don't get mired in bureaucracy and administration, particularly if the CDO is a change agent. And you have to be ready to pivot. So if you're bumping into a bureaucratic obstacle, be ready to bounce off that wall and change directions and tack to the next objective. So you have to know where you're going as well. You absolutely have to know where you're going.
All right. So the good strategy, obviously, and again, another plug for another book, right? We could get really boring, couldn't we, Todd?
Yeah, sorry, I'm commercial. I'll be selling pillows here real soon.
Great question here on the role in this case of maturity assessment. So I'm gathering this person has heard of various organizations doing assessments, and then Robert has a component of an assessment up there on the board. How do you guys approach that process? And I'm also going to add on here, I'm assuming this is for an existing organization as well as for a new organization. How's that for a question, guys?
Can I leap in because I've got something? Last time I was at the CDO symposium in MIT, we had a very intelligent, capable person coming in and talking about their latest developed data maturity model. And so I asked, what's it for? And which one do we see as being relevant? Because there are endless maturity models. I think, and people were standing up and sort of almost cheering this person because this was a new maturity model that they could measure themselves against, and it looked as though, you know, they could show, but with some clever dealing, how far they'd advanced along the maturity model, and therefore what they were achieving for business. And in two businesses that I've been working in, more than that now, what I've seen is a concentration on the maturity, on achieving steps in the maturity model rather than delivering value to the business. I think it's there. It's good as a handrail. You know, choose one, and work with it. Don't spend your life looking at the various options and trying to please all of them. But choose one, use it as a handrail, so that when you're asked the question, you can say, yeah, we've got to this level. And you can use that either as a whip to beat the business with, to say, come on, we've got to start doing better at this. If you were better at people with their data entry or whatever it is, we could step forward on the maturity model, and that would be a great thing. Or you could use it as we've all achieved level 3 now. Let's keep up the momentum. You know, let's bit more investment will take us to level 4. But and use it in that way, and don't concentrate on it, because if you do, you'll miss the point of what of your being there, which is to deliver value.
Well, so I'll put in what you said, but it's the maturity is useful as guardrails. I think that's very good, but it should be subordinated to value, and that I think is what. Sure. Who else wants to jump in?
I'll throw in another point. I agree completely with Michael. There's so many industry standards out there and maturity models between DAMA and we could just run down the list. The point though is, I often found that if you could find something that was very obvious, for example, in one case in Walmart, I was able to find that between 12 and 1 o'clock, sales were dropping tremendously in supercenters. No matter what the time zone, no matter where, but between 12 and 1, sales were dropping about 10%. And I brought this up to executive management and said, look, guys, I just wanted to point this out to you that we were playing around and found that you're losing, you know, a supercenter does $1 million a day. So that would be the equivalent of you're losing, you know, $10,000 or $20,000 during a very short period. It was by getting interest that way that all of a sudden everyone wanted to know the answer, and that created the ability for me to say, well, you know, since I found this problem or you know, piece of data, all I'm trying to get at is, if you could find something that will exhibit the problems that you found in your research, it goes a long way in getting people's interest. For example, many of the senior directors and executives at Walmart weren't really interested in data. They were too busy selling. But when you told them they were losing money, all of a sudden everyone jumped. So I'm just making a point that if you could find a piece of bad data in a bank, that would make it problematic in your regulatory compliance, that would be a piece of data I would bring up to the senior leadership and say, look at this piece of data I just found. We're missing 3 key fields required by this banking regulation, and therefore we're out of compliance. So I'll stop there.
All right. Well, we're getting close on time here. Can you guys stay on longer if we don't finish all the questions?
I'm good.
I'm good.
Thanks. All right, appreciate it. So here's the next question then. Is it better in the age of Agile to communicate that some things will need to be done, but they won't be able to be done in the first couple of days? In other words, that you have a longer time. And I'll add to this. It's a very good question. One of the things that I'm working with in my particular community is the idea that the measures we're going to take are going to be perhaps more useful on a quarterly to annual basis rather than, will something be done by Friday? What do you guys, how do you approach that sort of a thing? How do you communicate with management? What are the things, do you tell them the truth up front, or do you try and get some things under your belt before you sit down and say, now listen, this is going to go on for a long time? So it's probably a terrible bastardization of that question, but hopefully the questioner will appreciate it. Dead silent. Come on, guys, jump in.
All right. Well, one thing you could really quickly say to that is that you're up against a challenge, whatever you say, a date. So you don't want to commit to something without having a very good understanding, a project plan that shows that you can meet the deliverable on a date. So since you're only as good as your word, what I try to do is give ideas that we believe that within the next couple weeks, and we are iterative, right, we can quickly understand the current state of data. And then I'll be more than happy to present you at that time, after running, let's say, an automated data discovery, profile, and classification tool. I'll be able to tell you how bad our data is. And then from there, we'll be able to determine some dates to do, for example, machine learning, auto correction of addresses, things, master data corrections, those kind of things. So the idea of trying to give dates out is something you want to do very, very carefully, because you are only as good as your first date that you miss, and then you'll be held liable. So I'm going to stop there and let the others have a shot.
Thanks.
Peter, I don't think there's much more to say than what Robert has just said.
Done. All right. Oh, good. Well,
too many businesses will expect you to deliver something in the next week. You've been the CDO now for 3 days. What's your deliverable? Why haven't you given us something? And it's it might be the devil's own job to make them understand, but the sort of explanation that Robert has just said is what they need to know. And the quicker they get around that, or get their minds around it, the better it will be. And then there's always the opportunity for you to find something that you can deliver quickly and to sort of light the fires by just saying, "Hey, look, I've done this," and sort of get people to support you because you're actually doing something. But don't get caught by making yourself a hostage to fortune.
All right. Well, let me ask one final question here, and I'm going to start off with Robert, because I'm going to put a particular spin on this, Robert, that you and I will appreciate, and hopefully perhaps another musician on the line might pick up on as well. So the question is this: what methods or best practices should a new CDO take to understand and map all the data across the enterprise? Or instead of boiling the ocean with a complete mapping, do you start with one area of the enterprise? And if so, which teams have you found that are easiest to work with? So it's a very complex question. And the reason I was starting with you, Robert, on this is because as a musician, we have seen things change direction rapidly in life, in live performances, it's, other things. And in many ways, this is kind of like that, is it not? And I think it maps to some of your experience.
Yes, I agree with you. It is very much the life is fluid approach. So the question being asked is, should you try to boil the ocean in complete mapping of the enterprise, or should you start with one area? Well, everyone will tell you you don't boil an ocean, right? But there are very, very powerful tools today that give you the capability within weeks of looking at terabytes of information. Using, for example, cloud, and if your company would allow to use the cloud, you could use, thousands and thousands of virtual systems to run automated agents against your information. And you would be able to very quickly get an understanding of how much data you have, of what types it is, whether it's structured, semi-structured, unstructured. And then you would want to focus on one area. In fact, you'd want to focus on master data. Every organization lives and breathes off its master and reference data. And if your reference and master data are bad, you might as well shut down, because you'll be shipping to wrong locations. You'll be sending invoices to your wrong vendors. So generally, if you've already got a very strong master and reference data program in place and you're coming in and you could ignore that one, I would go across the other areas of interest. For example, areas of interest are always sales, marketing, finance, and from there, I mean, you could pick your poison. I know Todd and Mike probably have some good input into this as well, so I'm going to let them throw in their thoughts.
All right, Todd, you want to go next?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. I would also agree with Robert. I mean, a lot of us are thinking alike, but I am a huge fan of yellow sticky notes, and by that I mean I believe it's more important to have lists of things before you start mapping. For example, if you have no idea what assets you have, how can you possibly begin mapping? You have to do the blocking and tackling. You have to do what I call the data janitorial work. It's not glamorous. Nobody wants to do it. The boss doesn't appreciate it. It costs money, but it's the kind of thing that is the foundational work for all of the advanced analytics and the value proposition that you're going to be looking across the table into your boss's eyes and promising that you will add something to the bottom line next year. You have to figure a way to balance these things, and it all begins with yellow stickies, in my opinion.
And again, the word in the question here is agility, Todd, and you're speaking to something that is agility, but there's nevertheless the confusion with the agile movement as well. I don't know if we want to get into that. Michael, I'll give you the last word here, if you would.
No, I wouldn't disagree with what's been said. You know, you can't go in and boil the ocean, because as I gave as an example, when I moved into that to the business, there were 5. They told us they had 5 systems. It took us 6 months to get to 210, and we were still counting. You know,
Goodness.
At that point, you couldn't say we could go in and map it. It was just impossible. So we looked at where we could. To Robert's example, in that case, we went straight into a project, an area of the business that was going to be heavily data reliant, and began working on the master data piece of that. And that was picked up by the business. It was supported by the business. And from the success that we created there, we were able to take it elsewhere. In the government service, it was about understanding our people, and how many people we had, and what different types. That is not race and gender, although that did come into it. It's the very different types of contracts that those people were on, so we could account for them properly to, in this case, Parliament. So and we knew who we were paying. It was an area where there had been a historical problem, so we began by attacking there, and from the success that we delivered there, again, you built on it, whilst working everywhere at the same time, but accepting that, if you were like, to use a German military phrase, the Schwerpunkt was in the business case, it was in the master data in that particular area, and in the military, it was in the business. It was in the people that we did it. So find the area where you're going to have cooperation, and you're going to deliver some success, and begin there and work out.
I'm almost going to quit while we're ahead kind of a thing, because we had all three of our CDOs agree with us. So there's a very specific question, and everybody came down on the exact same side of it. Don't try and boil the ocean. Try to do something specific and get some value out of the process on there as well. Robert, do we have one more question? Am I seeing there? Yes, it is. All right. Are there more cases of success if a CDO starts inward to improve internal processes first, or outward by creating new data products? Are there best practices or general guidance to get initial momentum? Who wants to take it? And thank you guys for questions, by the way. It's been great.
Yeah. Robert, I'll go business specific or industry specific. It's, at the moment, there aren't any cases. Is it best to work inwards or outwards? In the case of the business I was talking about, we were looking at a project that was dealing with our customers, so it was almost outward facing, that we were doing. And in case of the government organization, it was our people, so it was inward facing. So it's about where the and in the bank, they were trying to boil the ocean, and therefore not really getting it up even to room temperature. So
wow.
So it's about understanding what the pain points are, and trying to work on the pain points. If your business's pain points are, or your organization's pain points are, the data it exchanges externally, well then that's where you're gonna look at in the beginning. And if it's internally, that's where you're gonna look at. It's about creating an area where you're going to get traction and be able to deliver success, and then build into the areas where there's skepticism and cynicism and people putting roadblocks up to progress because they think you're out to steal their jobs.
To do some research, think carefully about it, and again, the concentration on value, right?
Yeah.
I like that, Mike, your reference to cynicism.
Robert, this is probably our last one, so maybe any final parting thoughts or respond to this question as well here? Do you want me to read it again?
Sure. I've always found, and I don't know why, maybe it was just being in retail and being in CPG. I was not in the government, so I don't have that experience. But I always found that the first was looking inward. And that was because many times the organization claimed to have something that didn't exist. For example, we have master data, we have reference data, we have data governance in place, we have a data architecture that's well thought out. So many times I would take a position and jump in and quickly learn, well, that those are about as far from true as one would consider. The data architecture is a Irwin diagram. We've
been there, yes.
We've been there. So in my experience, and then just my personal experience, I always would first try and find out what my house was and if it was in order before I would then present that as a item that's for sale to the outside world. And many times it meant, running through a couple iterations, iterative processes to cleanse, organize, and then make the data available so that it could go out, if that makes any sense.
But again, your guidance is consistent so far. Todd, you're going to make it 100% or a disagree on that, internal or out external?
So coming back to my New York experience again, before you can answer the internal, external, I think you have to figure out exactly what your guidance is and what your authorities are. Once you have your authorities, you have a lot of latitude into setting which direction is more appropriate for your organization. Look, if you're answerable to someone else, or if you don't have any ability to make any decisions, I would suggest you're in big trouble, and it really doesn't matter which way you go. So I would suggest you first figure out exactly what decisions you own, and then align yourself with the business and figure out what they need. How's that for coming back to my first question, my first answer?
You flashed me back to high school where the answer was, put your head between your knees and so I'm pretty sure it's not quite that cynical, but yes, be selfish around some of those things. Well, gentlemen, first of all, let me thank you for spending time and thank the audience for such great questions here. We've ran a little over and there's actually another meeting waiting to happen on this, but Todd, thank you for taking your time. Robert, thank you for taking your time. Michael, thank you for taking your time. And the rest of you that are listening in on this, think about topics that you'd like to hear from us. Be in touch. And thanks for all your participation. It's just been wonderful. I think that is it. Somewhere.
Well, we'll have to publish the document. We'll get that out after this completes.
Oh, okay, great, Robert. Thanks so much.